Hi there. I should point out that I don't do TWID videos on D2 every single week because a lot of the time they're filled with a lot of fluff from Bungie. Here's what happened last week. Whoa, Iron Banner's coming back for the 9th time this season. That's crazy. Here's movie of the week. This week, though, there's actually something to talk about, like a lot to talk about, and I'm really not just saying that. Bungie's TWID Today is heavy PvP talk focused, and while there are upcoming patch notes that include stuff you might expect, like ability tweaking and whatever, there are other things coming in the next big patch that you are truly not expecting. There are significant changes to the game coming down the pipe in March, and we're going to go through all of them. If you want to skip ahead to the part in the video where I go past the usual patch note stuff and get into the big changes to D2, jump ahead to the following time in today's video. And again, I urge you to stick around and hear that part, if nothing else. And without further ado, let's dive in. First up, ability sandbox changes, which are coming in the big 7.3.5 update on March 5th. Mark your calendars for that day. Here's the TLDR of the ability changes. The threaded Spectre Strand Hunter aspect is getting nerfed. Threadlings in general are also getting nerfed, so they're not as oppressive in PvP. There's some fixes coming to the current restoration timer extension issue with a few extra solar fragment changes on top, and a small number of ability buffs are getting pulled forward. Bungie acknowledges that Threaded Spectre is essentially overperforming in high-level PvP activities, particularly in trials. One reason for that is that the uptime on Threaded Spectre is significantly higher than what it probably should be, especially with the very fast cooldown of the Hunter dodge and when combined with potentially having 2 Threadling grenade charges via the Widow's Silk aspect. In the upcoming update, Bungie plans on implementing a change that applies the same class ability regen penalty that Ensnaring Slam currently uses when the player creates a Threaded Spectre. Take note, they don't want the change to have a huge impact on Threaded Spectre's performance in PvE, so they're reducing the duration of that regen penalty by 50% when in PvE, which will also apply to Ensnaring Slam, actually increasing its uptime in PvE. Bungie's also increasing the Threaded Spectre's detonation damage versus PvE combatants by 25%. TLDR, you'll be making fewer strand clones in PvE, but the trade-off is that they will be stronger. The other half of Threaded Spectres going really hard in PvP comes from Threadlings, which admittedly are pretty damn frustrating to deal with. Bungie's solution there, make Threadlings easier to shoot and reduce times where you try to shoot them and nothing happens. Threadlings also deal significant chip damage in their current state to change the outcome of an engagement, so Bungie's going to also reduce their damage versus players, both in base form and with the Thread of Evolution fragment equipped. Next, they're fixing a bug where Threadlings weren't chain detonating as intended when one was destroyed, and also there was some kind of visual bug going on where destroyed Threadlings weren't appearing like they were being destroyed visually, and they would just kind of vanish into thin air. That is being fixed. Bungie goes on to mention that these upcoming changes, which again directed at Strand Hunter, also very clearly are going to affect Broodweaver Warlock potency in PvP, because the Broodweaver power fantasy is also very Threadling focused. To compensate, they're giving us some other buffs that were originally supposed to arrive alongside the final shape, but are now arriving in update 7.3.5 in March. Arcane Needle, the Strand Warlock super, is getting a bunch of upgrades, which it really does need, because 9 times out of 10 when I activate it, I feel like some of the needles just straight up have a mind of their own. Better aim assist angle by around 50%, increased aim assist fall off distance from 30 to 45 meters, increased tracking angular velocity by around 5%, increased length of projectiles tracking shape, and fixed an issue where uncharged melees while Arcane Needle is equipped resulted in the player appearing to freeze in a melee pose. TLDR, the Strand Warlock super will suck less. And real quick, before we move on to the Radiant and Restoration changes, a few thoughts. Thought number 1, I think it's a good call to tweak both Hunter Threadling and Green Clone Jutsu spam in PvP. I've been fiddling with the Threadrunner kit a lot lately in PvP, and yeah, it's very easy to spam and can be frustrating to play against. Thought number 2, Bungie acknowledges this is going to inadvertently backhand Broodweaver Warlocks in PvP, and their plan to make things right is to make Arcane Needle better? Don't get me wrong, I'll take it, because having half your needles fly off into the sunset in PvP or PvE when there's a target right in front of you really does suck. But that being said, I can't imagine the PvP Broodweaver mains out there are going to be dancing for joy because their kit got tanked. But hey, at least your super isn't garbage anymore. I feel like the PvE worm daddies are gonna appreciate that change way more is what I'm saying. Either way, less threadling spam in PvP at the end of the day is a dub for me. I'm here for that. Bungie has fixed an issue where the max duration of restoration and radiant buffs was being incorrectly stored, resulting in their buff timers resetting to their initial duration instead of their maximum when the buff was reapplied. That change also resolves similar issues with shorter restoration sources like sunspots with the Sol Invictus aspect. In addition to that, Bungie is adjusting both the Ember of Empyrean and Ember of Mercy fragments, explaining that if they didn't adjust them after the previously mentioned bug fix, they would be way too powerful. They mentioned that the bottom line between the bug fix and the upcoming change should result in either the same experience or even a better one in-game. Here are those changes. Ember of Mercy now extends your current restoration timer by 2 seconds when you collect a Fire Sprite. If you didn't already have Restoration active, collecting a Fire Sprite grants restoration with a 2-second timer. That timer is increased to 3 seconds while Ember of Solace is equipped. Ember of Empyrean's max timer extension is getting bumped up from 12 to 15 seconds. Also, Bungie is reworking the timer extension given with each solar defeat. Before, you always got a 4-second timer extension. Now the timer extension will vary based on the kind of target that you've killed. The stronger the enemy type, the greater the overall extension. Moving on, Bungie's got more solar changes that were originally going to drop in the final shape, but they are confident to the point where we're now getting them bumped up to update 7.3.5. For Sunbreaker Titans, Bungie is improving the consistency of consecration, making it easier to catch floating targets or enemies that jump too late. Probably a good thing because I do find that consecration is very easy to whiff. They're also increasing the travel distance of both the Scorch Wave and the Ignition Wave, and further increasing the Ignition Wave's travel speed both with and without the Pyro Gale exotic equipped. Overall, maybe this will convince more Titan punch bros out there to run consecration. I kinda hardly know any Titan mains who really use it frequently. Gunpowder Gamble on the Hunter is also getting a little bit of a tweak. They're cutting down the max damage you can deal to yourself so you don't blow your butt up with that weird little bomb bag. Moving forward, also on March 5th, we got weapon changes coming. Some of these are actually pretty interesting. Why don't we kick things off with the heavy burst hand cannons, aka the new subfamily containing the Warden's Law. Apparently Warden's Law accidentally had some kind of issue under the hood that was causing it to have less aim assist than other hand cannons, but only when hip firing or firing from the air on mouse and keyboard. I'm not gonna lie to you people, even when I don't hip fire or shoot from the air, new Warden's Law does not feel good to me. Overall, I feel like the heavy burst subfamily is gonna need a bit more tweaking for me to actually care about grabbing one over the wide variety of god tier PvP hand cannons currently in the game. Next up, bows. Bungie admits that bows continue to be frustrating to fight in PvP. They have no plans of changing them off of hit scan when fully drawn, but they are changing other stuff to make them require more skill to use at long range. Notably, an aim assist nerf. I don't know if these numbers will significantly make bows less annoying for the average player to fight in PvP, but I guess we will see. I do think this bow change has the potential to be big, but it's definitely not the biggest news in this TWID. Moving on, auto rifles. The Breakneck Auto accidentally shipped missing one perk in column 4, Lamau, so Breakneck is going to be getting target lock. That is kind of noteworthy, as it would make Breakneck only one of 3 450 RPM auto rifles in the game capable of running target lock. However, if you already have a god roll horror story, you might not really give a shit, especially since target lock would mean that you'd have to pass on Breakneck's signature perk, Onslaught. Lightweight scout rifles suffer from being very unforgiving when missing a crit shot. They're getting a 5% damage buff, meaning now instead of a 4 crit kill, it'll be a 3 head and 1 body kill. To those of you out there sitting on a god roll Guardian game scout rifle, time for y'all to rise up, I guess. Coming up, we have big changes to sniper rifles, but before we get any further, let me tell you about Geology. They've partnered with me on today's video, so let's thank them real quick. Geology is a 30-time award-winning skin, hair, and body care company recognized in Men's Health, Hypebeast, Esquire, Ask Men, and more. Boys, I get that many of us aren't incredibly knowledgeable on this type of stuff, but you don't have to worry. Geology does the work for you. Their skincare and hair care routines are custom tailored for each individual person. You want to look good, but you don't don't know where to start, don't worry, Geology has your back. Just take a 30-second quiz and their team of dermatologists will literally design a personalized routine just for you that is shipped directly to your door. If you're trying to fight acne, reduce oiliness, or just have healthier, more hydrated skin, you gotta check them out. Truth be told, I wish I had this kind of hookup back in high school. Acne problems straight up suck. Believe me, I know. Head on over to their site, linked below, and use my code Fallout70 and Geology will give you 70% off their award-winning skincare trial set and up to 30% off one of these skin, hair, and body add-on products when you add it to your trial. Take advantage of it while you can, and thank you, Geology. Alright, we back. Snipers. While less popular than some other special weapons in PvP, cough, cough, snipers are fairly oppressive to play against, particularly in 3v3. In a move I did not see coming, Bungie is reducing the auto-aim cone size by 10%. On paper, that could be significant, and at the risk of somebody shoving a banana in my tailpipe, yeah, snipers can be frustrating to fight in 3v3. Word on the street is D2 has a lot more aim assist compared to other games out there, so this change will mean that you'll have to be a bit more accurate to get a headshot. Side note, if you're a PvP sniper main, I actually want to hear from you on this. Hit me up in the comment section and let me know how you feel about that change. Rocket launchers, precision and high impact subfamilies are getting tweaked so they can better compete with adaptive and ag frame rocket launchers, which are usually just straight up better. Precisions are getting better reserve ammunition and a reduced damage penalty. High impact rockets are also getting better reserve ammo, and it will now deal more detonation damage and less impact for roughly the same total damage. That should make them more effective versus groups or when getting splash damage on a target with a near miss. These changes will also affect Deathbringer, Gallarhorn, and Truth. I kinda don't care about two of those, but that's interesting that at the end of the day, Gallarhorn is basically getting more reserve ammo for free. Side note, if these are the only changes coming to rockets in the final shape, expect rocket DPS strategies to stay on the menu in PvE. Moving on, grenade launchers, according to Bungie, are fairly strong mathematically, but it hasn't really moved the needle in terms of overall player usage. With that in mind, Bungie's buffing them again and also making it so that the spike grenades perk will feel less of a dominant pick overall. Here's the changes. Increased reserve ammo across the board and reduced spike grenades impact damage buff from 50% to 12.5%. Let's come back to that in just a minute. Increased direct damage on grenades and increased detonation damage by 5%. Okay, going back to the spike grenade changes, the question that people probably will have: is spike grenades still going to be the god roll pick? And the answer is yes. Even if the overall damage buff gained from that perk is reduced, if you're getting more overall damage with it than without it, even by a small number, yes, it is still going to be the best perk on a heavy grenade launcher in PvE. As Bungie mentions, it's less mandatory, but still probably what you want to get if you're farming for a god roll. Wave frame heavy grenade launchers have struggled to find their identity, which I hardcore agree with. They're not go-to DPS options, and they don't really have enough ammo to work for ad clear. And IMO, if I'm going to go wave frame for ad clear, I'm just going to whip out the forbearance. Here's the upcoming changes. Increased the heavy wave grenade launcher damage by 20% and the overall wave width by 40%. I think these changes are nice, but if I'm being completely honest, I still don't know if these changes are enough to make me want to use wave frame heavies moving forward. Time will tell. Caster swords are the only swords that have a ranged attack for now. Nice little tease there, Bungie. Anyway, Bungie is bringing the heavy attack damage up to approach the level of other swords, and they've also reduced heavy attack energy cost to grant higher uptime on the projectile attack. Nice, but again, I don't know if that's really going to cause me to suddenly be a caster sword main in PvE. Moving on to exotics. First up, the Vig Wing, a gun I sometimes forget exists, is getting a deterministic recoil pattern. If you don't know what that is, it's a thing that Bungie added into the game with Lightfall, where certain weapons have a predetermined weapon recoil pattern with the goal of allowing players who use those weapons a lot to kind of learn and master them with repeated use. If you're a Vig Wing fan in PvP, hopefully this makes the gun easier for you to use. I like it, but the 5-burst round is kind of jarring, so I haven't used it in a while. Vex Mythoclast fires like a high-impact auto rifle, and other high-impact autos have a larger ADS damage fall-off scaler, so Mytho is getting bumped up to match it. I don't think we're gonna suddenly enter a Vex Mytho meta with this change, knock on wood, but if you already like the Vex Mytho in PvP, this should be really good news for you. Wishender. Bungie comments that True Sight is a big part of that exotic's identity, so they don't want to flat out kill it. However, in its current form, form, it's really good in PvP, especially with the Oathkeeper. In the March update, True Sight will now deactivate if you leave ADS or if you hold it for longer than 3 seconds. To reactivate, you must fully redraw the bow. Good call, Bungie. I don't know if that's going to completely dumpster the Wish Ender. It's felt really good since the bow rework not too long ago. Between this change and the general bow nerf, we will see what happens. There's more bow changes coming, by the way. Stay tuned. Moving on, Edge of Action, aka the Titan Exotic Glaive. Bungie admits they nerfed the overall health on the Titan Junior bubble. With that in mind, the Edge of Action bubble now has better DR, 85% against all combatants except bosses, which still get extra DR, but only 15%. Next up, the Manticore, a gun I actually really like, but unfortunately gets outclassed by a ton of other god roll options in PvP. There's a bunch of tweaks coming here. First of all, you have to be airborne for half a second and deal damage with the weapon to activate the perk. This will prevent accidental activation when running downstairs or doing a very small jump. Next, special reload to quickly disengage the anti-grav thrusters if you feel like you want to get out of the air right away. While anti-grav thrusters are engaged, combatants will be less accurate when targeting the player in a similar way to the always-on-time Sparrow. Finally, a catalyst change. Final blows and sustained damage with this weapon while airborne grant a void overshield and return ammo to the mag. On the PvP front there, I think the catalyst change is going to be interesting solely for the free overshield part. Getting a free overshield on a final blow is kind of wild. Granted, you do have to be in the air, but yeah, that's worth keeping an eye on. For PvE, the part where enemies are less accurate in targeting you, that's kind of awesome. I really want to try that out. Teraba is also apparently getting the fast special reload thingy, and before you ask, no, I'm not worried about Teraba becoming hard meta again due to that change alone. Next, X-Diarist delivers on the Boomer Knight fantasy, but does not hit hard enough in PvE to be a top tier pick, which I agree with. Bungie's bumping up the impact damage on PvE enemies by 50% and upping the max rate of fire by 17%. I think the X-Diarist is fun for sure, but I really don't know if this change is going to get more people to use it. There's just a lot of really good special weapon options out there, both exotic and legendary. Moving on, weapon perks. Heal Clip wasn't as valuable to the activating player, so Bungie is now giving Cure ×2 to the player, but keeping Cure ×1 to nearby allies. Trench Barrel is now getting a buff where it can be activated by dealing damage with ranged melee attacks, which is just nice for consistency's sake. Barrel Constrictor, a shotgun perk I really wanted to like when it launched but just don't, is getting a buff. No longer deactivates on firing your next shot, lasts for 7.5 seconds, and the enhanced version is 8.5. Admittedly, that is really interesting. I think for shotgun mains in 6v6, this might be pretty spicy, but as tempting as that is for 3v3, I'm not sure it'll be able to dethrone my borderline mandatory PvP shotgun perk pick, Opening Shot. Barrel Constrictor, probably the play for multiple takedowns, but Opening Shot, probably the better pick for just winning a 1v1. Next, Loose Change, which Bungie admits is not interesting in PvP. Moving forward, applying an elemental debuff will now improve aim assist and ADS movement speed in addition to reload speed. I'm not gonna lie, that is very tempting, but needing to apply an elemental debuff in PvP isn't exactly easy to do. I'll definitely fiddle with this perk for sure, but to me it comes very close to being moving target with extra steps. I will admit though, the numbers granted by new Loose Change look really good on paper. I think I'm gonna try it out with a Briarbind Child of the Old Gods Void Warlock build. Stay tuned. Dual Loader is losing its reload speed penalty, finally making it just straight up handy no matter how you look at it. Bungie also mentions that they may apply it to other weapon types in the future, which is really interesting. Bungie goes on to mention they're shipping a couple of Tex Mechanica weapons in 7.3.5 AO, so they want to rework the Tex Balanced Stock Origin trait, which previously only gave an extra handling, reload, and movement speed when ADSing. Moving forward, it'll also give 20 range and better hipfire accuracy, in addition to the other effects. I don't know about y'all, but that kind of makes me want to whip out my Last Right in PvP. Keep an eye on that one for sure, could be important. Next up, the Hake Breach armaments, Deconstruct, and Sundering Origin traits are now going to work against Void Souls, Strand Clones, Cabal projection shields, and Briggs. That one seems kind of small, but yay if it buffs a weapon that you like. Hake Breach Armaments was also apparently doing too much bonus damage to stasis crystals. Okay. The Sundering Origin trait is getting a buff where it can now be triggered on shield break in addition to final blows on vehicles and constructs. The charge rate benefit though is coming down to compensate for the new, more frequent uptime. Hatchling is getting a buff where the activation requirements are no longer locked to the archetype in terms of precision or non-precision kills. Instead, the perk will trigger with either a precision kill or 3 non-precision kills. That's actually great news for Strand players or people who use hatchling weapons in general. Target lock is getting an SMG specific nerf because it's still a go-to god roll perk in PvP and one part of the reason that the weapon type continues to dominate. The update is target lock will now activate later in the mag for SMGs at 20% instead of 12.5. That could actually end up changing what a lot of SMG mains might consider a PvP god roll. I think for an Unending Tempest with a 27 mag, that would now mean that target lock wouldn't kick in until the 6th bullet, and because target lock ramps up in damage, that change could be enough to stop the perk from benefiting you in literally every single fight with your target lock SMG. I may do a deeper dive on the changes to this perk in a future video. Let me know if that's something you want. But we gotta move forward because we're still not on to the major changes yet. Envious Assassin was a bit too good on certain weapon types, namely drum grenade launchers. A sad change for a lot of PvE folk, but expected, as this was by far the best perk on a lot of heavy grenade launchers. Moving forward, each activation is now capped at 100% of the mag size instead of 150, and maximum overflow is now 3 times the mag size instead of 4. Overall, still a great heavy grenade launcher perk. A little bit of a fun police situation going on here, but I get it. Having one perk being miles above the rest usually means it needs to be rebalanced. Moving on, Bait and Switch is a little bit too strong, and they have reduced the bonus damage from 35% to 30%. Sad, but not really surprising. Bait and Switch has been a goated PvE damage perk for a long time now. Honestly, they could have hit it way harder, so it'll still be good. Don't worry too much. Finally, for perks, 2 fixes. 1-2 Punch will now correctly deactivate after dealing damage with a powered melee, and Deconstruct getting a proper in-game text update and a bug fix preventing it from triggering when shooting an enemy Titan barricade. On the mod front, bonus damage against mini-bosses should have been part of the boss spec, not major spec. Guess I gotta update my mod chart. Okay, this is where things really get wild. From here on out in the TWID, Bungie outlines major, and I really do mean major changes coming down the pipe to PvP. They mention they want to make big changes first, then micro-tune after that. To give a little context, Bungie mentions how at the base level, the PvP sandbox is filled with issues that affect not only new players, but hardcore veterans as well. Too often in PvP, players die extremely quickly to the point that there's almost no time to react, or so many things happen all at once that it's hard to determine the sequence of events that led to you dying. They go on to say that when that happens, it creates a situation where the player feels like there's nothing they could have done, which makes it harder to learn from your mistakes and improve. Additionally, Bungie mentions that the average skill of the player has gone up over the years, but the PvP sandbox has not correspondingly grown alongside it. This is due in part to the fact that many primary weapons have a ton of forgiveness baked into them. To summarize, at the end of the day, it's leading to a significant compression of the skill gap at high levels of play. Bungie openly admits that players have little reason to try to improve with primary gun skill. At high levels of play, things like high body shot damage, generous aim assist, primary weapon flinch, and low critical hit requirements all contribute to the feeling that putting in time to improve your skill with primary weapons is generally not worth the effort. Side note, it is wild to hear Bungie openly admit that out loud. With many meta primary weapons hitting optimal or close to optimal time to kill, it feels less like mastery of the weapon and instead feels more like standard play. At lower levels of play, players can still die very quickly to not very accurate opponents, which minimizes the time they have to figure out and learn the sandbox and makes them feel like they're playing higher skilled players than they actually are. Bungie mentions that because these symptoms are all generated by a handful of root causes, each linked to the others, it encourages Bungie to touch all of them at once if they're making big changes, or in smaller increments if they're modifying things individually. individually. Certain ability builds have either higher uptime or higher potency than they believe is healthy. To keep those builds in check, there's a near constant availability of special ammo, which means there's always a surplus of one-shot kill weapons in play, and because that is the case, they need to make primary weapons competitive by making them highly lethal and very forgiving. All of that leads to a high percentage of deaths in the sandbox where, from the victim's point of view, it feels like there was nothing they could do. TLDR, there's a risk versus reward problem. And with all of that in mind, here is what is coming into play on March 5th. Bungie mentions that upping player health gives them more granularity to balance sandbox elements and lets them decrease the relative lethality of a large number of things, mainly grenades and body shots, all at once and universally. With that in mind, base player health in PvP is going up by 30 in base Crucible. Players will have 100 health and between 116 and 130 shield based on your Guardian's Resil value. So the new max will be 230 instead of 200. Next, ability cooldowns. These new values, combined with changes to the mod economy from earlier in the season, will move the game to a place where ability uptime is healthier for PvP. Melee, nade, and class ability cooldowns now have a 15% penalty applied in Crucible only. Super cooldowns now have a 20% penalty applied to them in Crucible only. To account for the increased player health and the reduced uptime, Bungie's made some additional abilities to make sure they're not pushed out of usefulness. Base super damage is going up by 31%, melee damage is going up by 16%, the arc flux grenade is going up by 16%. Moving on to primary weapon archetypes. To maintain the same optimal time to kill as the current sandbox with new HP values, all primary weapons except bows will have their critical hit damage increased. They're also reducing the flinch dealt by hand cannons to players, as they were a consistent outlier even compared to other high damage priority weapons like scout rifles and bows. Pulse rifles, auto rifles, sidearms, and scout rifles are getting their critical hit damage upped by 14%. Hand cannons are getting their crit damage upped by 10% and their body shot damage reduced by 5%, and having their impact flinch lowered by 12.5% on other players, and the flinch dealt by explosive payload lowered by 10%. Submachine guns are having their crit damage upped by 12.5% and their body shot damage reduced by 3%. Bows are getting a flat base reduction by 15%. TLDR on the primary changes. Bungie is actually taking steps to potentially widen the skill gap in PvP by putting more emphasis on primary crit damage as opposed to body shot damage. Moving on, special ammo acquisition, and this one is big. After a lengthy test period in Crucible Labs, Bungie feels they are ready to move over the special ammo meter system, aka the thing they have going on in Checkmate, into the wider Crucible. Now, before you panic, hang on a sec. They've made a number of changes between the initial version and the new special meter. Here's the deal. You will now start every game with 2 kills worth of special ammo for your chosen weapon. Instead of 2 kills worth of special being granted every time you respawn, you'll earn more ammo by filling up a special ammo meter with points given for getting kills, getting assists, or completing objectives. 100 points earned equals 2 kills worth of special ammo for your chosen weapon. Base point values. Kills will give 23, assists and deaths will give 10. A control zone capture will give 14, and a heavy ammo pull will give 8. In elimination or dominion, kills give 38, assists and deaths give 16, a heavy ammo pull will give 10. In 3v3 respawn modes, kills will give 26, assists will give 12, and deaths will give 11. In Rumble, kills give 30, in Countdown, a charge armed is 20, a charge diffused is 40, and a charge detonated is 70. Further info, special ammo weapon and heavy ammo weapon kills do not grant any points at all towards special ammo meter progress. Jumping off the map will subtract progress from the special ammo meter, so no throwing for whatever reason. Special ammo is not dropped on death, and you will not lose the special ammo you've already earned when you die or are revived. Earned special ammo will carry over between rounds. Swapping from double primary weapons to a special weapon will reset your special ammo meter progress, meaning no rockin' double primary to build up meter to game the system, then swapping to a special at the last second. To offset the increased health and partially make up for reduced uptime, Bungie is increasing the base damage of a number of special ammo weapons. Trace rifles, shotguns, and fusion rifles are getting base damage upped by 20%. Glaives are getting their projectile damage upped by 20%, and their melee damage upped by 16%. Heavy ammo grenade launchers have been a PvP meta pick for a long time, and Bungie wants to make sure they don't get any better in PvP with the PvE changes outlined in the TWID. Reduced detonation damage by 5%, and machine guns have increased base damage by 20%. Finally, regarding certain exotic weapons. Some exotics bypass the special ammo economy changes, and others are also being tweaked to fall more in line with the new hand cannon steel less flinch changes. A couple other exotics are being raised just a tad so they aren't punished by the overall changes. Under that umbrella, Fighting Lion's damage against other players is going down by 20%. Devil's Ruin's charge beam damage against other players is going down by 15%. Crimson's level of flinch dealt is being lowered by 17.5%. Forerunner's damage is going up by 20% against other players in PvP. And Symmetry's Revolution damage is going up by 16% against people in PvP. Those last two aren't straight weapon buffs, by the way. I think they're clearly just going up in damage to compensate for the overall player health buff that we're getting. Bungie also mentions, by the way, that the PvP strike team is coming back next week with more info on new rewards, game modes, matchmaking details, spawn tuning changes, trials, updates, and more. Damn, that is a lot to take in. There is more in the TWID for the record, but it's more of the lighthearted fluff stuff for the most part. But yeah, dear God, substantial PvP changes that I was not expecting. Most of the time it's just, oh, we're tweaking this ability a little bit, or these weapons aren't good, why don't we make them better? This is a complete revamp of the entire special ammo system across the board, and I don't think we've ever had a change to overall Guardian HP values, at least not that I can remember. If I know the D2 community, and I think I do, a lot of players are straight up gonna be scared by these changes, which I get. To be honest, I'm kind of scared too, but the more I think about it, we're at a place in D2 PvP right now where something's got to give. Like Bungie said, so many of the problems they mentioned are deeply intertwined with one another that in order to address it, they either need to address all of them at once or none at all. At the end of the day, I'm ready for a shakeup, and that's what this feels like. This feels like a big shakeup. Now, I'm sure this shakeup may come with a lot of hiccups that people aren't expecting, probably a bunch of hiccups that even Bungie isn't expecting. But this is the first real talk I've heard from Bungie about actually working on the skill gap, which again, crazy. I will very eagerly be there on March 5th to dive into these changes, for better or for worse. Please let me know how you feel down in the comment section on this one. I will be reading a lot. I want to hear from you. Are these changes it? Are they not it? Right direction or not? Hit me up. Let me know. I am approaching this with cautious optimism, but again, tell me what you feel. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.